Eagles Nation. Something inside the Philadelphia Eagles organization is becoming impossible to ignore after this draft, because when you really break down the way Howie Roseman approached these selections, it feels like the front office once again trusted a formula that has quietly helped keep this roster among the most dangerous in the NFL. Instead of forcing picks based on desperation or reaching for positions of need, the Eagles stayed patient, trusted their board, and attacked upside all across the draft. And honestly, that may be the biggest reason why this class already has people around the league paying attention. The move that instantly grabbed attention was the aggressive decision to move up for My Lemon in the first round. That alone tells you how highly the Eagles valued him internally. This was not a panic move. This was not a luxury pick made without conviction. Philadelphia clearly believed Lemon was one of the best pure football players available in the entire class. And when you listen closely to everything being said around him, you start understanding why the organization became so comfortable bringing him into this locker room. A lot of the outside conversation focused on his personality, especially after some of the viral moments from his media appearances before the draft. But inside football circles, the discussion has been very different. The Eagles looked deeper than social media clips. They saw a productive player, a competitor, someone described as intense, durable, mentally tough, and completely obsessed with football. That matters inside a locker room like Philadelphia's. This organization has built one of the strongest cultures in the league, and they clearly believe Lemon fits directly into that environment. What becomes even more interesting is how many comparisons are already starting to surface around his game. Some people see similarities to Jackson Smith and Jigba because of the way Lemon moves through space and creates separation underneath. Others see shades of Amon-Ra St. Brown because of the toughness after the catch, the physicality, and the way he attacks defenders despite not being the biggest receiver on the field. There were even discussions comparing how he could be used similarly to how Sean McVay deploys Puka Nacua, constantly moving him around formations, lining him up inside and outside, using motion to create mismatches, and maximizing his awareness in traffic. And honestly, when you hear those comparisons together, you begin to understand why the Eagles were willing to be aggressive. This was never about straight line speed alone. In fact, some critics kept bringing up his 40-yard dash time, but internally the Eagles seemed far more interested in his play speed, instincts, toughness, and versatility. That is exactly the kind of receiver Philadelphia has recently valued. Somebody who can impact the game in multiple ways instead of simply being a vertical threat. Then you move to Eli Stars in the second round, and this may quietly become one of the most fascinating picks in the entire class. There are already people inside football circles who believe Sturs could eventually become the best tight end from this draft group, and what makes him especially intriguing is his athletic background. He originally played quarterback before converting to tight end, which explains why coaches rave about his movement skills and versatility. One comparison that completely surprised people came from Vanderbilt coach Clark Lea, who actually connected Sturs' athletic traits to Kyle Hamilton. That is not being said casually. Hamilton is known for rare versatility, intelligence, range, and flexibility across the field. Obviously, Sturs is developing at a different position, but the point being made is about the athletic profile and the ways he can be moved around the formation. Philadelphia may have found a chess piece rather than a traditional tight end. Imagine what this could look like with Dallas Goedert already on the roster. The Eagles now have the potential to create major problems out of 12 personnel packages. Defenses may struggle deciding how to match up, especially if Sturs develops quickly. His physicality, size, and ability to attack mismatches could become a huge weapon for this offense, especially in red zone situations and underneath coverage areas. And what really stands out about this entire draft is the consistency and mentality. The Eagles did not seem interested in safe picks with limited upside. They targeted traits. They targeted competitiveness. They targeted versatility. Even later in the draft, that philosophy kept showing up. Take Keshawn James Newby, for example. 7th round edge rushers are usually viewed as lottery tickets, but Philadelphia clearly saw traits worth developing. His production jumped off the page with tackles for loss, sacks, forced fumbles, and disruptive plays across multiple levels of competition. But more importantly, the Eagles saw explosiveness. At nearly 240 pounds, downs, running with that kind of speed and bend off the edge immediately gives him developmental value. This is exactly the type of player Philadelphia has quietly developed before. Nobody expects a 7th rounder to immediately become a star, but if newbie turns into a rotational pass rusher or special teams contributor capable of giving meaningful snaps during the season, that becomes another successful late round investment by Howie Roseman. At the same time, there is one area where questions still remain, and that is safety. Even people praising this draft heavily admit they were somewhat surprised the Eagles waited so long to address the position. Cole Wisniewski brings toughness and run support ability, but many expected Philadelphia to attack safety earlier considering how important that spot could become during the season. What makes this especially interesting is that Howie Roseman himself hinted the Eagles may not be finished building that room yet. That immediately raises questions about possible moves still coming over the next few months. Because if Philadelphia adds another serious piece at safety before the season starts, this roster could suddenly look even more complete than it already does. And maybe that is the most dangerous part about all of this. The Eagles are not acting like a team satisfied with where they are. They are still building, still adjusting, still looking for ways to maximize the roster around Jalen Hurts. And with young talent now arriving on both sides of the ball, the organization clearly believes this window to compete at the highest level is far from closing. But the biggest question now is this. If My Lemon and Eli Sturz develop the way the Eagles believe they can, could this draft eventually become another defining moment in Howie Roseman's roster building legacy for Philadelphia? The more you analyze this Eagles draft class, the more it starts feeling like Philadelphia was not simply trying to add depth pieces for the future. It feels like they were specifically targeting players capable of fitting into the identity of this team immediately, and that becomes extremely important when you look at where the Eagles are as an organization right now. This is not a rebuilding roster. This is a team trying to stay in championship contention while continuing to get younger, faster, and more versatile at the same time, and that is exactly why the discussion around Sean Mannion becomes so important moving forward. A lot of people around the league believe the success of this offense in 2026 may come down to whether Mannion can maintain the same level of structure and efficiency that Kellen Moore previously brought to Jalen Hurts. Because when Hurts has stability, when the offensive system is functioning correctly, and when the supporting cast is healthy, this Eagles offense becomes one of the hardest units in football to stop. That is where players like My Lemon and Eli Sturz suddenly become much bigger than normal rookie additions. They are not arriving to a bad football team searching for direction. They are entering an offense already loaded with talent, meaning their strengths can be maximized instead of forcing them into impossible situations early. That matters tremendously for young players. With Lemon specifically, the Eagles now have another weapon who can create production in multiple ways. This is not just a receiver who needs perfect deep balls to impact games. His toughness after the catch, ability to work underneath, awareness in space, and versatility inside formations could allow the coaching staff to get creative immediately. And honestly, the comparisons to players like Amon-Ra St. Brown continue making more sense the deeper you study his game. One thing that stood out in discussions around Lemon was how much emphasis was placed on his mindset. Multiple people around the program described him as somebody completely locked into football, a grinder, somebody who takes preparation seriously. That becomes especially important in Philadelphia because this locker room already has established veterans and strong leadership structures in place. The Eagles are not bringing him into chaos. They are bringing him into one of the strongest cultures in the NFL. And there is another detail that should excite Eagles fans. Philadelphia clearly believes positional versatility is becoming more valuable every year in modern football. That theme appeared throughout this draft class. Lemon can move around offensively, Sturz can line up in different spots. Even some of the later selections were chosen because of athletic flexibility and developmental upside. That is why the Eli Sturz selection keeps gaining more attention the more people talk about this draft. His background as a former quarterback gives him a unique understanding of offensive concepts, spacing, and defensive leverage. And when you combine that with his physical tools, you start understanding why coaches see such a high ceiling. There were even comments suggesting he was one of the most important skill players at Vanderbilt outside of Junior Sherrill, especially in helping Diego Pavia succeed offensively. Now imagine defensive coordinators trying to prepare for Dallas Goedert and Sturz together. One can attack vertically Ironically, one can work underneath, both can create matchup problems against linebackers and safeties, and suddenly the Eagles' offense becomes even harder to defend in situational football. Third downs, red zone possessions, play action concepts. Everything becomes more dangerous when versatile tight ends are involved. At the same time, the defensive side of this draft should not be ignored either. Philadelphia continued taking calculated swings on athletic upside, especially late in the draft. Keshawn James newbie may have entered the league without huge national attention, but the traits are very real. Speed off the edge, flexibility, disruption in the backfield, production against the run and pass. Those are exactly the types of developmental edge rushers the Eagles have historically loved working with. And even though some concerns remain about safety depth, it is hard to ignore the logic behind Howie Roseman's approach. Instead of forcing a selection simply to check a box, the Eagles stayed disciplined to their board. Roseman even hinted after the draft that if a team leaves a draft having perfectly filled every need, it probably means they reached on players instead of trusting value. That philosophy has helped keep Philadelphia among the smartest drafting organizations in football over recent years. The Eagles are constantly thinking long-term while still competing immediately. And honestly, that balance is incredibly difficult to maintain in the NFL. There is also growing curiosity around what the Eagles may still do before the season officially begins. Roseman openly suggested the safety room may not be finalized yet, which naturally fuels speculation about potential trades or veteran additions later in the offseason. If Philadelphia finds another reliable piece there, the overall roster could become even more balanced heading into 2026. And maybe the most impressive thing about this entire situation is how calm and controlled the Eagles front office appears throughout all of it. There was no panic, no reckless drafting, no desperate reaching for headlines. They trusted their evaluations, targeted specific traits, and once again walked away with a class many believe carries major upside. Now everything shifts toward development. Can My Lemon become the versatile offensive weapon the Eagles believe he can be? Can Eli Sturz emerge into a dangerous mismatch creator alongside Dallas Goedert? Can late-round prospects like Keshawn James newbie outperform expectations the way Philadelphia has seen from overlooked players before? Because if even a few of these projections become reality, the Eagles may have quietly added another wave of young talent capable of extending their championship window much longer than people expected. What makes this entire situation even more fascinating is that the Eagles are building this roster while fully understanding that expectations around the organization have completely changed. This is no longer a franchise simply hoping to compete for playoff spots. Every single move is now being evaluated through a championship lens, and that pressure changes everything about how a front office approaches roster construction. That is why the Eagles continuing to prioritize upside instead of desperation says so much about how confident they are internally. They are not operating like a team trying to survive. They are operating like a team trying to stay ahead of the rest of the league. And when you think about it, that mentality really started becoming obvious after the organization learned painful lessons from previous draft mistakes years ago. There was direct discussion around how the Eagles used to overthink situations, especially when they reached for need instead of simply taking the better football player available. Since then, Howie Roseman has completely shifted the approach. When talent falls, Philadelphia attacks. That philosophy has helped build some of the deepest rosters in football over the last several seasons. You can see that exact mindset throughout this class. With My Lemon, the Eagles clearly ignored outside noise and trusted what they saw on film. The production mattered, the toughness mattered,